Our final piece of looking at where we are right now comes from Gareth Thomas MP. We're going to have a quick look at the coalition 12 months on and how is it promoting mutuals. Gareth is Shadow Minister for the Third Sector. He's no stranger to the challenge of moving from the grand conversations we might have in a forum like this to the detail of putting things in place, because he helped steer the Industrial and Provident Societies Bill through Parliament, giving a more secure legal framework for community, cooperative and mutual organisations. He's a former Minister of State for Trade Policy, and former Minister of State for the Department of International Development. He's Chairman of the Cooperative Society since 2000, member of the Fabian Society, and has written on social responsibility and low-carbon economy. To talk about the coalition 12 months on, please welcome Shadow Minister for the Third Sector, Gareth Davis MP.
Andrew, thanks very much, and thanks to you all and to Mutuo in particular for this opportunity to join you at the fourth Mutual Forum. One or two of you are very familiar faces, but I hope over the coming months in the new role that I have working for Ed Miliband, to not only restore acquaintances with those who are familiar faces, but also to get to know better some of you that I've not had the opportunity to meet thus far. Without doubt, as all the previous speakers have alluded to, our economy is facing probably its most challenging time in recent history. But as Will alluded to, it is striking that the mutual sector is probably at its strongest point now, certainly for the 20 years that I have been active in co-op and labour politics. As we've heard, it employs over 1 million people and turns over more than £110 billion annually. As I, and as Andrew alluded to, I am from the co-op and mutual sector, and I take particular pride in the success of many of the big beasts of the mutual sector. Co-op group gross sales up 9% to nearly £14 billion. In 2010, its profits were the highest it's ever been, up 31% to some £625 million. But perhaps most exciting of all for a politician is the fact that the combined business now has over 5.8 million members in the society, playing a role in its ownership, in its decision-making processes. It's been a record year for the Co-op Bank, and at a continuing time of crisis, as Will and Andrew alluded to again in the financial sector, it grew by almost 25% in just 1 year. And just a few weeks ago, the final part of its merger with the Britannia Building Society took place, a merger that I was proud to play a small part in as a Labour and Co-op Minister, with Co-op Bank services now available in all of the 245 Britannia branches. Co-ops and mutuals then, I think, have shown their importance to our banking industry. They have been and they are responsible, sensible institutions that PLC banks would learn a great deal from. When confidence in other institutions has collapsed, mutuals have grown, they've strengthened, and they've showed the way, surely, for responsible business in our country in the future. What has been the coalition government's role in all of this? Well, it's not all bad. They have talked, certainly, a very good game. The coalition agreement, as Peter Hunt alluded to in his opening remarks, promising to foster diversity and to promote mutuals. I think the challenge that I would throw back to the coalition government is where is the action to justify that bold aspiration? You might expect me to come here and just be negative about the government's performance. But since the election, the world has continued to change. And so what I say is more a robust challenge from someone who is a big supporter of the sector. To begin with, I think we should applaud the coalition's decision to place mutuals in their coalition agreement. It is, of course, right that the government, any government, should have due regard to the role of mutuals in financial services and across our society as a whole. So genuinely, I was pleased to see their commitment to foster corporate diversity and to promote mutuals. It is a worthy aim and one that we should praise them for endorsing. These high-minded statements, though, clearly need to be followed up by serious policy and implementation work. And that policy, it seems to me, has to be based on a genuine understanding of the issues that face the co-op and mutual sector. That means there should be dialogue, there should be discussion with mutuals on a regular and at a senior level basis, as there was under the last government. And there then has to be action to follow this, that both reflects the policy objectives and the day-to-day needs of mutual businesses. Now, no one could say that business is easy for mutuals at the moment. And when the model in financial services is based on very slim margins in high-volume trading, a recession or stagnation will always spell bad news. But that is why it is even more important in today's world that mutual voices get a stronger hearing. And despite that rhetoric of fostering diversity and encouraging mutuals, what has the coalition done to support the financial mutual sector? I would suggest to you that actually it's less than nothing. Let's take child trust funds, more than 60% of which were successfully provided by mutuals, scrapped immediately when the coalition government came in, wiping out significant business opportunities for friendly societies. And that matters to me not just because I believe in child trust funds. It matters because mutuals were able to dominate this market by treating customers fairly, again on very low profit margins, that ensured the best deal for hard-working families. Now that surely isn't a coincidence. It's part of the DNA of mutuals that exist for no other purpose than for serving their customers, their members. No drain of profits to shareholders, just high-quality, value-for-money products. I'm not sure everybody in government has quite grasped the significance of the difference of the way mutuals operate, the different motivations that those who run mutuals have to have in comparison to the rest of the business world. So on child trust funds, no points there for the coalition government for what has been an unthought-out policy with severe consequences way beyond the rhetoric of not sending out vouchers for everyone. Savings are, of course, a good thing. And when you think about the other policies that are increasing costs to our young people, higher tuition fees, for example, it seems to me extremely short-sighted to remove the opportunity that trust funds offered for more savings maturing at the age of 18. And we could also look at the government's attitude to Northern Rock. It was in the manifestos of both Labour and the Liberal Democrats to bring Northern Rock back into the mutual sector. The co-op Conservative approach has been very different. But to be fair, they did commission a report into its future. Again, what has happened since that report was commissioned? In the summer, we heard the Chancellor announcing that he wants to sell Northern Rock, even before he had received the findings of the UK Financial Instruments report on its future. We always suspected that George Osborne wanted to reprivatise Northern Rock. It's not just that they do not agree with us, it is that they appear not to have understood the lessons of what happened to Northern Rock in the first place. And surely if we do not learn from past mistakes, we're indeed doomed to repeat them. For me, it's relatively simple. Here we have a small bank, not of significant size, but an important part of a competitive and diverse high street. Surely it makes sense to keep it independent rather than to sell it to another existing bank. Surely it also makes sense to change its risk profile from one that was ultimately dependent on wholesale money markets to one that works by serving its customers well. As a mutual, it could do all of that. We do know, of course, that the taxpayer wants their money back too, and quite rightly so. But realistically, there is not likely to be a great deal if Northern Rock is sold in a fire sale that comes back straight away to government. Surely the only responsible course of action is to turn it into an independent mutual and for it to pay back the taxpayer over time. In the current market conditions, that wouldn't be easy, but it would send a strong signal to the industry about what government values and the type of business it wants to see in the future. So I think the government should publish the UK Financial Instrument report. I don't believe it can all be so commercially sensitive that none of it can be published at all. And surely we as taxpayers have a right to try to understand how long it would take to get our money the money used to save Northern Rock in the first place, under different options, back to government. If we look at two, right across the financial services industry, mutuals have had to deal with a succession of serious and challenging hurdles. Some put there by regulators, others as a result of government response to the financial crisis. Again, it seems to me we have to be even-handed. The current government didn't create the financial crisis, nor incidentally did the previous Labour administration, despite what we're told on a daily basis. But to take another example, say the Treasury attitude to mutual insurers with profits funds. Again, I think they are bordering on the negligent in their attitude on that issue. The Treasury has a clear policy responsibility to the sector, and it's simply not good enough to hand over responsibility to the Financial Services Authority that apparently at the moment sees no real difference between how you regulate PLCs and how you regulate mutuals. Again, government found wanting on the detail of implementation of policy. So while we hear about the potential for new mutuals, there at the moment, I think, is little evidence that the government properly understands or indeed properly intends to do anything to support the bulk of the existing mutual sector. As Andrew said, I have just been appointed to shadow the Cabinet Office as Shadow Minister for the third sector. And that gives me a ringside seat for what is a major initiative on public sector reform that the government are undertaking. And I certainly do not underestimate the significance of the government's ambitions for establishing new mutuals from public service providers. Now that could be as pivotal an ambition as the decision to allow tenants to buy their own council homes was, or indeed the privatisation of so many state-owned businesses in the 1980s. I say could, because I know that running any business is a difficult task, and ensuring that it operates in the interests of customers, in this case the taxpayers, is certainly an acquired skill. I support, too, further reform of our public services. It seems to me that public services will have to become even more flexible, even more localised, and even more responsive to the needs of those they seek to serve in the future. So I like the idea of involving even more employees and communities in decision-making around the services that affect them. But the big difference, surely, between this plan and previous Conservative conversions from public ownership must be that they're not merely transferred to self-interested shareholders, but they genuinely permit ownership to be held in the public interest. New mutuals have got to be responsible and responsive. So combining business efficiency with accountability is a much older idea. Co-ops and mutuals have been doing it for nearly 2 centuries. And as the recent financial crisis shows, they can continue to provide an anchor of responsibility in an ever more risky corporate world. The mutual sector does have long-standing experience of doing business responsibly on the basis of clearly defined values, clearly defined principles, and a clear understanding of how to work with members, but also with public service staff and managers. It's clearly a very worthwhile aim to seek to couple business efficiency on the one side with accountability to the users and employees of services too. It's not easy, but with the right support, it can be done. And this, I think, is also a problem area for the government, because the Cabinet Office talks about new mutuals, but in their case at the moment, they seem only to mean employee-owned businesses. They have an ambition of 1 million public sector workers owning their own firms by 2015. And I think some senior civil servants, Sir Humphrey perhaps, would describe that as a brave target. At the moment, there appears to be little in the way of real support to make that happen. And certainly there is no support at the moment that I can see to really trying to support communities to come together, employees, yes, but customers themselves coming together to form new mutuals. If you look at the mutuals yearbook, as Will quite rightly encourages us all to do, you can see that there's been a great growth in new mutual membership in the last few years. But that's come not from employee ownership on its own. Rather, surely it is the result of government-driven and government-supported initiatives such as foundation hospitals and co-op trust schools. And indeed, Will gave the example of Lewes Football Club, football supporters trusts, strongly encouraged by government too. It took many years to achieve that impressive figure of 2 million new members of these multi-stakeholder mutuals and a nurturing, supportive environment from government helping to make that happen. So in 2011 today, employee owners will all too soon be faced by very stiff private sector competition for contracts. Only very recently, the excellent Surrey Nurses Employee Mutual lost out to Richard Branson's private sector health business in a straight fight for a contract. It is a difficult, competitive world to make a way in, and we have got to make sure that we are not bystanders, those of us with responsibilities in government, as these fledgling social businesses see the best contracts hoovered up from beneath their noses. There's got to be proper level playing fields if competition is to work properly. And we've got to make sure that new mutuals are not mere stepping stones to wholesale privatisation of the public sector. So that's why I call again upon the government to give support to community-owned mutuals that are able to grow into mature businesses operating in the public interest, spending what is, after all, taxpayers' money. I do think the government deserves some credit for its handling of the proposals to mutualise the post office, not least because the process adopted by the Department for Business is a far cry from the frankly chaotic approach that seems to be in existence in the Cabinet Office. BIS at least sought the advice of mutuals, notably through Mutuo, and rather than starting with the solution that it must be employee-owned, to be fair, they did take time to think through the best mutual structure for this important business. The answer, one that combines business efficiency with accountability to the people who use the service. So a truly mutual answer to a modern problem. And as the opposition, we could support that part of the changes they wanted to make for our postal services and Royal Mail. It also shows, it seems to me, that all politicians need to respect what has worked in the past. A general election isn't year zero, and we should be prepared to continue with what works. And that is a lesson for my party going forward, as much as it is surely for the coalition government too. In the next few months, my responsibility will also be to take forward our policy development work on the third sector, the policy on mutuals, on cooperatives, on social enterprises. We will, by the time of the next election, be in a very different political and public policy environment. And that the Labour Party and indeed the Co-op Party need to recognise that. One particular priority for me will be to think through how we can make even more vibrant the emerging social finance market that is beginning to develop and where many financial services mutuals that exist at the moment have a real interest. As I say, I hope that I will have the chance to engage much more with many of you, those I know and those I don't know, in the coming months as we begin that process of developing policy for our party for the next election. I wish you well for the rest of your conference today. Thanks very much.